We gotta rise up now and shout it, cause you know we're gonna get 'em. We won't be silent! We won't be quiet!
As with any explosive growth, there's a storm brewing. Today, we're unpacking a really high-stakes tension: the incredible Philippine solar boom, the very real safety risks that come with it, and a looming regulatory crackdown that could quite frankly fundamentally change the entire market. To really understand why this boom is happening in the first place, we just have to look at the numbers. The Philippines currently has the absolute most expensive residential electricity in all of Southeast Asia. We're talking a painful 13.8 pesos per kilowatt hour. So what happens? In response to these crushing power bills, people are taking matters into their own hands. We've seen a staggering 600 megawatts of new rooftop solar adoption over just the last 12 months. People are desperate for relief, and, well, solar is providing it.
Okay, let's dive into this number, because this is where the sheer scale of the situation truly reveals itself. 5,068 megawatts. That represents the net imports of solar panel capacity into the Philippines projected for 2025 alone. To put that into perspective for you, that is more than 5 times the amount of utility-scale solar connected to the entire grid that same year. This massive inventory buildup proves that a market explosion isn't just a possibility anymore. So, here is our quick roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The Philippines solar boom. 2. The real cause of fires. 3. New strict DTI regulations. 4. Financial and market barriers. And finally 5. Balancing safety and growth.
Section 1. The Philippines solar boom, crashing costs and mass adoption. Let's look at exactly why everyone is rushing to install these panels at such a dizzying pace.
And this brilliantly illustrates the driving force behind the boom. Just look at how the economic payback time for solar has completely crashed in just a single year. For residential users, the time it takes for a system to completely pay for itself dropped from 4 years down to just 3.1 years. But check out the commercial sector. It went from 3 years down to an incredible 2.3 years. When an energy investment pays for itself in just over 2 years, especially in a country with soaring electricity rates, mass adoption isn't just likely, it becomes an absolute financial no-brainer. Section 2, the real cause of fires. What does the data say? Because look, with rapid growth comes the very real risk of electrical fires. So we need to look past the panic and examine the hard data to see exactly why these thermal events actually happen. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in the root causes. When fire investigators actually analyzed photovoltaic system fires, they found that a massive 36% were caused by poor installation practices. Another 10% were due to system design errors. But look at the hardware itself. Only a tiny 5% of fires were actually attributed to faulty products. So the data paints a very clear picture here. The primary danger isn't necessarily what is being installed, but how it's being installed. Digging specifically into the most common point of failure, the DC isolators, the evidence is, quite frankly, overwhelming. Detailed fire investigations revealed that the vast majority of these failures were directly linked to human error. Installers were simply making mistakes that allowed water ingress into the electrical components, which eventually sparked the fires. Again, the specific evidence points directly to poor installation practices as the primary culprit, not a fundamental flaw in the manufactured hardware itself. So, with thousands of megawatts of solar panels sitting in warehouses and a proven risk of fires linked to installation error, we have to ask, how is the government actually responding to the safety risks of these systems? Let's pivot and take a look at the newly proposed regulatory landscape. Section 3, New Strict DTI Regulations, the draft DAO. This brings us right to the Department of Trade and Industry and their newly drafted administrative order that targets solar hardware safety in an attempt to rein in the market. Now, this draft order didn't just come out of nowhere. Utility companies have raised some very serious alarms over public safety, property damage, and grid stability due to unregulated or improperly installed rooftop solar setups. Documented cases of panel overheating, electrical fires, and structural damage basically pushed the DTI to intervene with a sweeping new set of technical regulations. And the scope of this draft regulation is massive. It mandates that almost every single piece of a solar setup must undergo rigorous testing, factory audits, and mandatory product certification before it can be legally sold or installed. We are talking about the solar PV modules themselves, the inverters, the battery energy storage systems, rapid shutdown devices, charge controllers, and, even the PV cables.
Pretty much nothing escapes this new certification net. Section 4. Financial and market barriers. The cost of compliance. See, implementing mandatory certification on this scale doesn't just mean safer hardware. It introduces profound friction into the supply chain. Let's objectively look at the financial hurdles this creates for the solar market. So the crucial point here is Rule 4.1 of the draft order, which literally dictates that only one local importer per license is allowed. This fundamentally limits market access. Think about it. If a local business wants to import the exact same Tier 1 highly rated foreign solar panel that another company is already importing, they are forced to file a completely separate, expensive, and time-consuming application from scratch. Critics are arguing that this creates a highly anti-competitive environment that heavily favors established monopolies over smaller local installers. And while the financial burden doesn't stop at the application, Rule 16.3 requires importers to post a 150,000 peso surety bond, or 10% of the declared value, whichever is higher, for every single shipment of imported solar components. Industry experts note that for small and medium-sized businesses just trying to meet consumer demand, this ties up massive amounts of working capital per shipment. It effectively skyrockets the cost of entry and ultimately drives up the cost of the solar system for the end consumer. Section 5. Balancing safety and growth, the core conflict. Let's move on and see how this all builds into the growing tension between the country's desperate energy goals and these massive new bureaucratic hurdles. What we are seeing here is a direct, undeniable conflict of national priorities. On one side, you have the Renewable Energy Act of 2008, which legally mandates the state to accelerate the exploration and utilization of solar energy to reduce our dependence on really expensive imported fossil fuels. But then, on the other side, you have the new DTI Draft DAO of 2026, which imposes strict financial barriers, heavy red tape, and mandatory hardware auditing that will undeniably slow down the deployment of those exact same solar systems. Which brings us to a really vital question raised by the data. The industry argument right now is essentially, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Remember those numbers? With 36% of PV fires caused by poor installation and human error, and only a tiny 5% due to faulty products, industry advocates argue that regulating hardware imports with massive surety bonds completely misses the mark. Instead, sources suggest the real solution isn't hardware red tape that chokes out small businesses, but rather strict enforcement of the Philippine Electrical Code. The government could directly address the human error actually causing the fires without strangling market growth. As the energy emergency continues and electricity rates remain the absolute highest in the region, this regulatory tension is only going to escalate. The demand for rooftop solar is an unstoppable force right now, but consumer safety obviously cannot be ignored. So the ultimate question we're left with is this: how will the Philippines balance the critical need for cheap, accessible solar energy with the undeniable need for consumer safety, without slowing down the very transition that could literally save the grid? It's a complex puzzle, and how it gets solved will dictate the future of energy in the country. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the data.